Hey, Soul Survivors, we are live. I am here with Dr. Schaeffer, and we are going to talk about boundaries, little challenges in life. You guys are welcome to go ahead and discuss anything, pop in, communicate with us, but boundaries are extremely important. So, I might call her Holly if that's okay.
Perfectly fine with me.
Dr. Holly. So when setting up boundaries, you seem to be extremely good at being succinct in your words and getting to the point. How do you go through the thought process on what is the important things to have this be an effective boundary?
That's an interesting question to start off with. I think a lot of it comes back to being a scientist.
Oh,
What has to be said to get to the point? And what's extra? And I think for some people, this is a real problem. Like, I'm too brusque because I just say what I have to say.
because I didn't mean to interrupt,
No.
but a lot of people that are coming to my channel deal with struggling to set boundaries, to maintain them out of fear of repercussions. Also, through the trauma experience, is you get really wordy. You're trying to cover every little base because, like, a narcissist will pretend they don't know what you're talking about. So, how do you balance what would be too brush and brass, or what would be?
I think I have some idea of what you're talking about from growing up. And I had to work really long and hard to, what would you say? Put the past behind me?
Okay.
Because in my family, a lot of things, I mean, if you've ever come home from school and been like, what's wrong, Mom? Because things are being thrown and you're going, something's really wrong. And I want to just bury myself in my back room.
Right.
And she's like, nothing, everything's fine. And you're going, throwing things should not be fine. Do I reset my definition of normal to throwing things as normal and fine? Or do I recognize that I'm not going to get a real answer? So I think as I've had to come out of that and become more of an adult than maybe even my parents have been, that I've needed to say, you know what? If I turn off some people by the way I am, we're over 9 billion strong, folks.
That's true. So not everybody's going to like us. We do need to start weeding out who our people are to where we're not too afraid. That's what happens with me is, sometimes you're like too afraid that you're going to upset somebody, but then we carry a lot of emotional turmoil within us.
Yeah. And I think I certainly have some of that, but I don't think that I have. I think I've, over the years, finally come to accept that ultimately, when I put my head down at the end of the day, it's me I have to live with.
That's true.
Did I do my best in my interactions with people that I can live with myself? And if they aren't happy with that, I have to sometimes work really hard at it, but that's on them.
Now, are you ever worried that, because usually when you set a boundary, it's sometimes you want the relationship, so you back down on
Absolutely.
How do you handle that, where you don't want to lose this relationship, but you're so scared of losing it?
Well, one of the topics you wanted to talk about was my marriage. And I think my husband and I have worked very hard over the last 19 and 7/8 years to figure out how to be a team. And I think if you consider any relationship, this one where it matters to you, then what are your flexible places? Where are you willing to say, how important is this to me really compared to the relationship? And Ken and I do a very nice balancing act. There are times when I'm kind of a pain. And he'll call me on it.
Aw.
And I'm not usually saying aw at the time. I'll just point that out.
Thanks for keeping me accountable.
But I do ultimately come back to thanks for keeping me accountable. Maybe not in so many words, because I tend to be short with my words, but we know that we can call each other out and say, hey, I didn't like when that happened.
Right.
And can we come up with a different way of doing it? Because we want to make sure that ultimately the team is intact.
See, I noticed too that it sounds like you guys have really good communication.
Absolutely.
And when you deal with a narcissist, a lot of them have a more childlike state. Now, we are both teachers. And so a narcissist, their emotional state is anywhere from like a 2-year-old up to high school. So when you're trying to communicate with them, I've noticed you have to be very succinct and not verbose.
Okay.
So when you're talking with the students, do you feel at high school, do you feel being very direct, or do you feel like, because I know sometimes we want to get our feelings out where you're like, it really upsets me when you do this, so I need you to do that. How does it affect it when you connect it to your feelings? Is that positive or negative? Hi, Brad.
I don't tend to do that. And the reason is because I think when I get into the classroom setting, I don't want to sound ugly about this, but I don't matter. My feelings at the end of the day are not what are going to drive my students.
True.
And if they don't care about me or don't like me, and I put, I don't like it when, or it doesn't feel right to me, what are they going to do? They're going to play that one up in a way that's just going to drive me insane.
Right.
Or I look like a liar because I brushed them off.
And that's why sometimes, right. Sometimes when you're trying to work through, hi, Courtney. Courtney, I used to work with her. She's a teacher too. Courtney, you're going to have to meet Dr. Schaeffer. Dr. Schaeffer. I'm going to say doctor. But I lost my train of thought. So what happens when you're dealing with a narcissist is, like I said, we're used to explaining ourselves. You become hyper vigilant and just trying to get your point across. And I think it's really important what you were saying is sometimes when we connect the feeling to it, do you think it's more important to deal with our feelings on our own self? And then do you give choices to the students, or do you give them ultimatums? What kind of?
I think ultimatums are a very bad choice. And I unfortunately or fortunately, I haven't raised children, but I've watched enough people with their children who set ultimatums they're never going to do. If you cross that street, I'm going to kill you. No, you're not.
Right, right.
And besides which, the car will beat you to it if they're not careful. So let's be real with our kids, whether that's our biological kids or our student kids, that you got two choices. Now your two choices might be you're going to do this or you're going to the office. And they're like, I'm not doing either one of those. Well, then I'll bring the office to you.
Yeah. And this is where relationships, you don't have that outside support.
True.
You can't tell your husband, like, all right, you're not going to do the dishes. I'm going to go get our pastor.
We're going to have dirty dishes and it's going to smell in here and I'm just going to leave them because it was your turn to do them.
Right.
And we're not quite like that, but the idea is there. There's plenty of things that get left undone.
Right.
Don't look in the closet.
I don't know if you've heard of the term like reactive abuse. I know as a teacher, there are sometimes I've accidentally escalated things because reactive abuse is basically somebody does something wrong to you and then you react to it. So it's kind of abusive on both sides, but like in self-defense, you
respond in equal way. And I think I've certainly gotten caught up in those. And I think one of the downsides is I am succinct. I am fairly decent with the language. And there are times I make a comment in return to some kid who's saying something obnoxious in the back of the room. They're like, ooh, she burned you. And I'm going,
right.
I didn't quite mean it to go that far. But
yeah.
If it gets me a response that I like,
right, then I meant it.
And then I just got positive reinforcement for the next time. And maybe that wasn't the best way of handling it.
Yeah, because what I did is these kids were urban kids. They had extreme traumas in their life. And I thought because when I was growing up, we didn't want our name written on the board, and that was kind of what kept us in track. So I wrote the name on the board, and everything exploded. There were like severe fights. These are third graders, and there was 4 fights. One girl she had a braid about this thick put in, and it pulled out from the roots, and I'm like holding on, trying to and another kid smashing a chair over a kid's face, and
rough.
all because I wrote that name on the board. So, have you noticed when certain teachers or certain parents use like the negative as opposed to like positive reinforcement? Have you noticed some differences in that? Or rewards?
I think that there are a number of teachers that use the positive rewards, but I feel like they do it in a way that is a bribe.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, this teacher does this. Why don't you have candy when we do X, Y, or Z? And going, did you need to do the right thing just because there was candy involved, or because you want a good, productive learning environment? I'm confused.
Right. and they were even saying too, though, that when you get the rewards, like I was an art teacher, and I've been an everything teacher, but that year I was an art teacher. And so basically some of the studies I've done is if you give these rewards, the kids are working for the rewards instead of the self-satisfaction.
Right.
So over time, they're not going to want to do the art because, well, if I don't, what's the point if I'm not going to get a reward?
Right.
So can I ask you some things that you utilize when you're a little bit unmotivated or down and out, some things that keep you going?
I have been a subscriber now to an organization called Life Hack Tribe, and I have really valued it enough that I actually pay money for this. And they do this whole thing on productivity training.
Okay.
And so part of that is, I made the comment earlier about don't look in the closet or the back room or the barn or the shop. There are so many things that I want to do. There's so many things I want to learn. I think this is maybe the challenge of, kind of mentioning my doctorate degree, but my dad always said, oh, you're going to become a professional student. Well, Dad, you were right.
Yep.
I'm a professional student. I love to learn everything. I love to do anything that I can do. And there's all these things I want to do, but when during the school year is there an ounce of free time for me?
True.
Well, Life Hack Tribe has taught me to carve out some of that time. And sometimes that's been as simple as spending 10 minutes getting to school early before contract time and taking 10 minutes and sitting down with a journal and writing down the stories. I've got this ongoing joke about writing books. Oh. I've got titles for my books. I've got stories, man, all kinds of stories. But some days I'm just living the chapter. I don't have time to write the chapter. And so I was actually sitting down for 10 minutes before contract time to just write a few notes. And sometimes it's not even writing the story. It's writing enough of it that I could go back to it later.
Oh, true.
And what's 10 minutes in my day?
Right.
Hardly anything. But I can do this thing of just a little bit of time here or there, or checking in with my calendar every weekend and making sure that I know what's coming up. Maybe not just next week, but the following week, and make sure that I didn't double book things or that I don't have different meetings overlapping. Because I'm sorry, but when you've got overlapping conflicts, life turns into a nightmare where it didn't have to be.
Right.
And we're in charge of our calendar, but we let our calendar run us, and then it runs us right into the ground.
So I know when like going through doctorate school and all that kind of stuff, did you ever get overwhelmed and feel like quitting, or what kept you motivated? How did you balance everything?
I don't know how I ever made it. There are times when I look back and I think, so many of these tools that I have at my disposal now, the book that we gave you.
Right.
I wish.
Go ahead and plug it. Say it.
So you want to go to graduate school, Everything You Needed to Know But Didn't Know You Needed to Ask. It's written by Ken Poff, my husband, and Bill Gordon. out of Howard University. They ran a minority research program at MSU, Michigan State University, for a dozen or more years, helping people to find out, how do you navigate graduate school? And I can't tell you how many people we've given that book to who've said, man, I wish that was around when I was doing graduate school, because it was hard enough being first generation to go to college.
Oh,
But then first generation to go to grad school? What is grad school? You are going to become a professional student. I mean, that's where that came from. I was doing my graduate applications in my back bedroom, and my dad yells down the hall, Butch! And I decided, I'm not going to respond. I'm not going to respond. And he opens the door and he goes, what are you doing? I said, applying to graduate school. What are you doing? Being a professional student? Yep. I didn't know to say yep at the time. And back to what we were talking about a moment ago. Uh-oh, I'm going to upset Dad. I can't say anything, right?
Now, because I had asked you, did you ever feel like, were you not good enough, or did you have to live up to different expectations? That sometimes where we end up in life isn't always where our heart was. So
I think imposter syndrome is real. I have no doubt that throughout graduate school, I knew somebody was going to be like, you don't belong here. There was really stringent requirements. You had to have B's or better.
Yeah.
So the first class I got a C in, oh my gosh, I got home, my dorm, the graduate dorm at Michigan State, and my poor roommate, Leslie, she was doing whatever Russian homework she was working on. She's like, what's wrong? Nothing, right? Well practiced from my mom. There's been many years to get to where I am now. And she's like, really? Because it looks like you're packing. No, I'm just putting away my summer clothes so that I have room for my winter clothes.
Oh. Not
really, Leslie. You were right. I was packing because I was pretty sure after every test, I was getting sent home because 3 C's and you were out.
Yeah.
And so I got my 2 C's, and the letters you got from the dean's office made it sound like, how dare you waste my time with this? So I really struggled with all of that identity stuff. And what got me to graduate school? As an undergrad, I had to do research my senior year. Yay, University of Maine, Black Bears.
Go
Michael
Black Bears.
Veda, you were and are probably one of the greatest inspirations I ever had. He got into the lab one Friday night, looked at me and said, what are you doing still here? And I said, well, I couldn't wait until Monday to find out the results of my experiment. And he says, but you got Friday night. Aren't you on duty for the fire department? You got things to do. And I'm like, yeah, but I couldn't come in over the weekend. So I just needed to stay and get this result. And he's like, wow, you're really hooked to this research stuff. You should go to graduate school. And it was like the week before the final chance to take the GREs to get into grad school.
Oh, so you were under pressure.
2 weeks before final exams for fall semester, my junior year. Yeah, and I didn't have money. I got to pay how much for the late fee to take the GREs to prove that I should go to graduate school? Holy moly, I'm going to have to cut a lot of corners in the next couple of weeks to come up with that check.
Right. Now do you work well under pressure, or does that make it more difficult for you? I work good under pressure.
I think most people around me would tell you I'm horrible at it because I drive everybody crazy.
The last day of school.
No, what are you possibly talking about when everything's going wrong? But the truth of the matter is, I mean, back to how do I get motivated? I grind down and say, you don't want to be pressured by these things being due.
Right.
Who's the person who would write the checks as the bills walked in the door and got opened?
Yeah.
Because I didn't want them to be late. Because growing up where bills didn't get paid and things got turned off and cars got repossessed and dad had to walk to work. No, I don't want to be that person. And so any time that I'm looking at not wanting to do something, what are the ramifications of me not doing it? Am I willing to live with that? And that might make part of the reason why it's so hard to understand my students needing a piece of candy in order to want to do their homework.
Right. Yeah.
Because
and sometimes they're conditioned to it too, to where they expect it or
yeah. So it's hard for me sometimes to make that generational leap from, like you said, when I was a kid, we're not in Kansas anymore, Schaeffer.
Right.
What are we going to do differently to address that while also teaching our children to find their self-motivation, that they want that better life?
So we got some people joining us. Feel free to ask any questions. It can be on the topics that are touching your heart right now. We're pretty good about flip-flopping between discussions, but this is Dr. Schaeffer, and we're talking about setting boundaries. People who deal with narcissists, sometimes, we set these boundaries and we back down on them. So we're talking about that. We're talking about the emotional, mental state. We're both high school teachers too. And so dealing with that mentality, I would say you can't deal with them in the same way that you can deal with adults. Do you agree? Or
definitely.
Now, what are some things that you've noticed that you would have to do differently? If you were going to talk to me, whether I upset you or you needed something from me versus how you would talk to a 14, 15-year-old.
I think for a 14 or 15-year-old, I'm probably going to be more direct. And probably, I think the number one thing any teacher, any human should really be thinking about is, how do I build a relationship with this person so they even want to listen to me?
Good point, because it is the relationship.
Because without the relationship, it doesn't matter what approach you take.
Right.
And with the relationship, an occasional brusque answer is going to be passed off as, Schaeffer's having a rough day. It's not me.
True.
But when that's all they get, they're kind of feeling like, man, does she hate me?
They start feeling that without that relationship, they're going to start to feel you're nagging. And that's why in the triggered state too, I know you've taught other places, but were they all urban or were some of them more affluent?
I have taught all over the map. I have done affluent, suburban, rural, urban, low socioeconomics, high socioeconomics.
Have you noticed a difference in whether it's attitudes, parental involvement?
I'm going to throw triggers, in a different element to this.
Okay.
We're now, believe it or not, 5 years post-COVID.
Oh, good point.
Most of the positions that I had were pre-COVID.
Okay.
Now, I'm blessed that some of those experiences crossed the COVID border. Sure. I taught community college, early college, right at the beginning of COVID, 2019 into 2020. And I taught urban and teach urban now. So I've got overlap.
Right.
And the amount of difference pre and post COVID have been gargantuan.
What are some things that you've noticed?
And I think it's important, the science nerd again, it's really important to recognize observations and the inferences that are coming from it. The observations that I have when I started at the early college and I was teaching these young people, they were 11th graders who were going to go off to college classes in second semester as juniors in high school. It was pretty awesome. And we coached them into how to be college students.
Great.
And then they went off to college. And then we shut down the college.
Oh, I had a college close on me.
And the students that I was mentoring were across all 3 years of the early college.
Okay.
We lost a huge number of them during COVID.
Oh, I bet.
Oh, I can work full time and I can do my classes virtually. And so I can make all this money. And you know what? Yeah, I failed my classes but I got all this money. And so I don't want to be here anymore. Can I just get my high school diploma and go work full time for Amazon or Meijer, because they're paying really good money. And I think I had 5 different families who had family-owned restaurants.
Oh.
And what were they? The free help when the restaurant's business closed.
Good point.
But they were trying to figure out how to stay afloat. If you want to look at studying an evolution of surviving through challenges, look at the restaurant industry during COVID. They figured out that even though they didn't have takeout and they didn't have delivery, that the only way they were going to pay for the building to stay afloat until they got through COVID was to provide. And they changed to a model nobody had ever seen before, and we can't go back from, because now everybody's come to expect it. But who was working? oh, I'm afraid of catching COVID. I couldn't possibly continue my job. And besides, I have this wonderful unemployment package because the government said you had to
Right.
close. So the kids were working without salary to keep the family afloat.
And that's
And
sad.
some of those kids were working to keep the family afloat because their families were out of work. Their parents were out of work. And so we have now, and I'm leading from the observation into the inferences, but we have a generation of teenagers who have figured out that minimum wage is a pretty good pay when you're a teenager. And look at the money you can have, and you can be self-sufficient, or you can help the family. And all of a sudden, school doesn't look that important.
True.
And so how much of what we see of our challenges in the classroom are because of this economic base shifting?
Right.
But how much of that is also the mental health side? As I pointed out to my young high school kids, you were in middle school when we shut down the schools.
Yeah.
And I said to them, what were you supposed to learn in middle school? And one of my young men spot on hit it. Socialization.
Yeah.
How do you interact with another human being? And you and I are now in the position of having to model that for a bunch of kids who haven't had to watch it. Oh, sure, yeah, they watched it on a camera screen. Like y'all think you're watching the two of us right now, and how much truly are you capturing of the body language, the nonverbals, the angles of how we are sitting that are saying something. Yeah. You can't capture that on screen the way we are on this side of the screen.
Good point.
And how many of those kids were little circles with initials?
And they didn't always have their cameras on.
Exactly. They were little circles with initials. And you were supposed to know that somebody was on the other side of that. How many times did you end a class and they were still there?
Right.
And they were still there a half an hour later because they either fell asleep or walked away. They weren't even in class, but their circle was.
Yeah.
So I think we have so many elements that we can't begin to identify about how COVID affected our teenage generation and who those people are going to be now, becoming young adults and being the customers, being the consumers, being the workers, soon to be the bosses.
Yeah, and they'll be our caregivers, our doctors.
Yikes.
They're going to be our caregivers. That's about.
I know. It's and how do you remedy that? We're in the school setting trying to figure out how do we fix the reading skills that they didn't get, or the writing skills.
What the reading level is? It like third grade across U.S.? What's the reading level?
Don't know. Back when I was doing Red Cross disaster work, we were told, and first aid teaching as well, all written materials were written at a 7th grade level because that was what the average person's reading level was. And I agree with you, it's probably not that high anymore.
I know they lowered it to 5th grade. And Courtney, are you still here? Was it Courtney that I was talking to who said 3rd grade? I'm not sure. But Courtney, if you're still here, type my teacher friend.
Drop us a note. What do you know?
I'm trying to remember. It was either Courtney or Mallory, but I heard 5th grade, and but we're all probably right. You probably heard 7th grade, and then when I heard it, and then when she heard it, we're not going up though.
No, we're definitely not going up.
And in the schools, do you think the kids are being rushed through, or do you think it's trauma? Because do you remember? I know it's hard to remember everything in high school, but some of the things they're teaching, I think they're teaching more advanced than when I was in school.
I worry that we're not teaching nearly as advanced. And I'm going to throw this challenge to you. As a society, we have advanced far more than the content has advanced.
Plus, their resources are more readily available so they can present smarter, but are they mentally smarter? Like I can chat GPT a fantastic whatever for you guys, but can I present that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Or the line that I love to use with my students, it's only been 2 years that I've had a smartphone.
Right.
And I'll challenge all of your listeners, our listeners, Do you have a smartphone so you don't have to be, or to make you smarter?
Oh, and also too, when people Google it, like, go Google, what are they really learning?
And there's also some evidence. How many times do you end up having to Google something before it sticks in your head?
True.
Have you practiced remembering stuff?
Right.
So that you don't have to just keep looking it up. Because I think we have chosen to use our smartphones so we don't have to remember stuff. Well, what do we want in our children in their education? Do we want them to be able to know how to find information, remember information,
right,
or use information?
Remember and apply.
And I taught at a college where I was teaching anatomy and physiology for people, my more derogatory way of saying it, who think they wanted to go to medical school, which was my way of saying, you think you want to, but do you really belong there? And my comment to them at one point was, look, you are going to be my future healthcare person.
Right.
And if I'm going in for surgery and you're like, excuse me, I got to Google where your gallbladder is, you're fired.
Oh, yeah. That's true.
I'm sorry, but I need you to remember some basic things, folks.
Now, I'm not sure. Is there something when they're doing surgery, they have certain things like on the screen to kind of guide them?
I don't know.
I want to say there's something. I'm not. I should ask my sister. But I was going to tell you when I was around college age, I'm like, Mom, Dad, I got into medical school. They're like, you did? And I'm like, and they go, which one? I tell them whatever one that I was going to for regular schooling.
Okay.
And they're like, how'd you do that or something like that? And I'm like, well, I just walked through the door, like the door. I didn't apply.
Oh, you just got in.
I got
like you walked in the door.
That's right. I can get into almost any school.
Well, I think in this day and age, the security measures might not let that happen anymore, thankfully. Or unthankfully, I don't know. It made for a good joke, though.
Right. But I told you I think I told you that. I was a cheerleader at a university I never went to.
I don't think you told me that last part. No, how'd you do that?
Oh, my daughter was in 8th grade and 7th or 8th grade, and she was cheerleading. I'm like, man, I really miss it. And so I started calling one of your tryouts and made the team.
And then they found out you weren't actually a student.
No, they asked what I was studying. I told them what I was studying, but I was studying it online. So through a different college.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
So really, you have done just about
my
everything.
Picture's up there if you want to see it.
Okay.
Yeah, I've done pretty much. I cheered at 3 different schools, and 2 I went to.
That is funny. Yeah, I think security measures probably would have kept.
Oh yeah, now if I had to do that, I didn't have like student ID or anything like that.
Yeah.
Or even just now, check your email for the tryout or workout schedule or tryout or game schedule. And
so overcoming challenges.
Yes,
I think everybody should have to overcome challenges. And I think everybody does. So here's the question for you. You've brought up a number of times about trauma responses.
Right.
Are trauma responses because people don't have the skill set for overcoming the challenge that it becomes a trauma?
In a sense, having the skill set would make it better, but there are some traumas that, whether it's a husband or a parent or a boss or somebody in authority, that sometimes, like if you were a child, you don't have the necessary resources to leave. If you're 7 years old, you can, even if you set the boundaries the right way, you do this, or I'm going to grandma's, or, but it's like, you can't, or you get beat too much, whereas like you're picking your battles where it's like, okay,
Do you overcome that trauma response then?
It's hard. It is hard.
Because here's where I'm going. When we talk about overcoming challenges, some of those challenges are traumatic.
Oh, yeah.
And so what do we need to do to help our young people learn that the trauma does not define them and that it can become a challenge in their own psyche that they overcome. Because if they're still surviving on the other side, they are a survivor.
Right.
And being a survivor of trauma, you still overcame it.
True.
To some degree. Now, granted, I'll call it baggage, but that tends to have a pejorative I'm not wanting. But that baggage can flare,
Right.
not unlike a painful joint, right? That can flare up under the right circumstances.
Right.
But you're learning to find a normal path for yourself where you can say, oh, yeah, I had one of those. I guess I need to learn how to do that differently.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up because sometimes if you think about it, I'm going to set my boundary. If my boyfriend or my husband cheats on me, he needs to know I am not sticking around.
Right.
Now you got to leave. And that can be traumatic sometimes. But you
again,
have to
back
look.
To those ultimatums. If you're going to make that as your boundary.
Right.
And that maybe this is one of those places that I'm unique. You need to have decided that is the boundary with a plan in place.
Right.
That will make it doable and not put it out there without a plan, because then it's just a threat without follow through.
Right. And then they start getting used to it, like, la, la, la,
yeah, right.
okay.
Exactly. Back to that.
But it's, I still struggle myself with boundaries and sorry about the lighting right now, guys.
Yeah. That windows.
I'm still setting up the house. I don't have the best lighting here. Let's see if this helps. But you don't want to give an ultimatum. No, that makes it worse. So an ultimatum is where you're trying to control the person to change. A boundary is to keep yourself safe. Okay. So it's like a slippery slope on, you either stay faith. It's so hard to even, like, I still struggle with it. How do you word it so it's a boundary? Mm-hmm. Because you say, this is what I'm going to do if you do that. Like, go ahead and do it. But this is what's going to happen. As opposed to saying that I need you to stop cheating. It's so hard. Like, I do struggle with it, but you know what I'm saying? And certain instances it's real hard or easy. You can just put those boundaries out there. Don't touch me or I'm out the door. But when you're trying to have a relationship with someone, you can't always say I'm out the door. And
the time to talk about it is also not maybe in the middle of it.
Yeah, sometimes you do need that cool off time. Have you and your husband set up something that is effective? The light's going to get better soon. Sorry, guys. To conflict resolve.
Well, it's where I'm coming from, that idea that you don't say at the minute, I hate your tone of voice, right? Or your tone of voice is just getting me really upset.
Right.
Because it's just going to continue.
Right.
In part because he doesn't want to hear that he's upsetting me. And that upsets him more. And so then we're kind of in that escalating place. And so it's easier, when we have that conversation, and that's usually what one of us will do is, we're having that conversation and here's what happened. And it's really awkward when, excuse me, can we come up with a different way of doing that? Or can you tell me when that's happening, that's an example of it, so that we can kind of flag it at the moment, but not try to flag it while we're in the middle of it.
Right.
So that we know to expect that being flagged. And I think that has helped a lot.
So did you notice any years? You've been married, 20 years?
Going on soon. Yep.
Okay. So they talk about like the 7-year itch or anything like that, where there's certain years that were the most difficult? And then I'll say what my knowledge is of it. In your
I was
really
listening online to a song. It was called "The Best Day of Our Lives," and it was a song written to a couple that was getting married. And I was listening to it, and I'm like, yeah, I remember thinking that. And every day since that has been better.
oh
I feel like we've had our rocky spots, but I feel like we both waited long enough in our relationship. I mean, I don't think we told you this, but we've been together for what, over 10 years before we got engaged and married.
oh, what was the holdup?
Me.
Oh, you played hard to get.
Well, I came from a family where there were certain expectations of a man and a woman in a relationship, in a marriage.
Right.
And I'd already broken those rules because I'd gone off college and I'd gotten a degree and I've gotten a graduate degree and I've gone off and had a career.
Okay.
So I'd already broken all those rules. But somehow there's this part of me that was afraid that if I got married, I would get sucked into having to be submissive and having to give up everything and not being able to be myself. And so, I don't know, something about boundaries and conflict and all of that stuff. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of that. And
hey, Kenny.
So I actually did say no a few times to proposals. And somebody was stubborn enough to stick around anyway. And so when we finally got around to it and we finally said, this is it, there were a lot of factors involved. My mom had just passed from cancer. And I remember sitting by her side in the hospital. She was supposed to go to hospice. That didn't come through. She died the day before hospice was supposed to meet with us. But Dad would call her and I'd be sitting at the hospital bed and she was in a coma and I'd pick up the phone and my line was, she can hear you, but she can't answer. And then I'd put the phone up and I'd keep hearing him saying things like, love you, Butch. And he'd talk to her and say all these sweet things. And then he's like, okay, I'm all done. And I'd hang up the phone. And I remember this one time I just started crying. They've been married for 43 years. And at this rate, I won't even have one.
That's where I'm at.
And so.
Hi, Tyler. Tyler, good to have you joining. Oh, I remember you.
So I don't know how much that got its place in making it such that it was the time, but he stuck by me in all of it.
That's awesome.
And I knew that if I could have somebody that would stick with me while I was 1,000 miles away.
Yeah, he's a good guy. I've met him. He's actually out. Is he connected right now?
I couldn't get any better than that. And then truly, every day since, I feel like we become closer friends.
Yeah.
And to be married to my best friend, my confidant, my shoulder when I need it, my best cheerleader, I did exactly what I needed to do. I just wish there were more years together.
Yeah.
And that's, there's always that bittersweet, like, if you'd figured it out sooner.
Right.
Well,
And that's the thing. Sometimes, it's okay to wait, that we don't have to rush in. We don't have to think I'm 18, 20, 21. I got to get married. That's part of the reason I'm still single is, I could be married right now, but
would you be happy?
I want to like my husband.
I had 2 students one time in my classroom and they said to me, Ms. Schaeffer, do you believe in love at first sight? And I said, you have to listen very carefully to my answer.
Okay.
And not what you think I'm saying. Yes, but you can't know it for a really long time.
Ooh. Okay, I'll agree with that. Yeah, because you get that, whoa, this is the person.
The whoa is always like hormones and adrenaline rushes and
dopamine fixes.
Yeah, and this whole optimization in your head of what it could be based on a moment, a day, a week, a year.
And there's like the chemistry and all that stuff goes on.
But 20 years later, I'm like, yeah.
I still like him.
I do. And that first time was pretty awesome. even though at the time I didn't get why it was so awesome, because I didn't have the experience level on which to base it.
And I heard you talking to him. You were having a really hard day, and you had called him, and you were kind of saying, "This is what's going on right now." And he's like, "Well, that's why you called me." And
Yep.
but he's got a point. But the part I liked is he wasn't like, "Just get it together," or "Oh my God, here we go again," or "I can't help you, I'm busy."
Or I can't, how am I supposed to help you? You're on the phone with me.
Right. And he just, sometimes you just need somebody to, encourage you or listen to you. And you can see, and it's calming being around them together. It is. They're super interesting people. And so we're going to open it up. If you guys want to add anything in, we're taking all different kinds of topics, but Holly just has a really good way. I've watched her deal with the different students, and I've seen her relationship with her husband, and there's something just enough difference that I'm learning from her. It's not just, they have a good relationship, or I like the way that teacher handled it. Like, the way you handle your students, the compassion, the thoroughness, proactiveness.
Well, and like I said, it's about the relationships. You're walking in and seeing that interaction, but the beginning of the year wasn't so pretty. The beginning of the year was a pretty much a hot mess.
And it happens every year.
It does. But you know what? I believe it's going to get better. The difficulties I've had the last 2 years was I only taught seniors. And at the end of the year, the seniors left.
True.
And there was nobody to go, hey, here's who this teacher is, and she'll be fine. And you just got to, figure her quirks out, and it'll be all good. And this year, they didn't all leave at the end of the year.
Right.
So they can actually be like, look, Schaeffer's a little quirky, but just here's the things that I did that really pissed her off, and you might try to avoid this.
Right.
And then,
So what are some of your triggers? What are some things that they do? I got triggered with that ChatGPT. I don't like that.
But, like we talked about, when a student cheats, there's a reason for it. And I think this is probably more so what I try to do. And trust me, there are some triggers where, man, oh man, I almost don't want to put them on screen, because I don't need anybody borrowing my triggers,
right,
and using them on me, because, we don't like that.
That's true.
In every setting, even when I do get triggered, I pull myself back and remind myself, they're doing it for a reason.
Yeah.
What is it they really want and need from me right now?
True.
And with my students, to probably the 95% level, what they really need from me is somebody who gives a damn.
You're right.
And their way for asking of that,
hey, Dale,
is just as difficult as it is with any other human being. They don't know how to say, hey, I'm hurting today. Could you help me?
And I found it really interesting to where you ask them what's wrong. Mm-hmm. They're like, I don't know. And I think, a lot of people I know, there are times where you're like, I don't know what's wrong. Whether it's hormones or depression, or
mom said something on the way out the door and I just didn't know how to take it.
Yeah.
Right? Or mom wasn't home when I left. And I don't even know where she is. I mean, that's a thing for some of our kids. And frequently, I will come around and be like, hey, you're sleeping. We've got this work to do. Yeah, I'm just really tired. I worked too late. Well, what can I do to help you?
They have a lot of pressures on them too. Guys, the sun's going down. We'll have better lighting pretty soon.
So I came up with, and Schaeffer would come up with the 3 S's. Safety.
Right.
Structure. Service.
Okay.
If you're ever on a plane, why do they go through all of the safety procedures at the beginning?
True.
There's structure. You need to wear your seatbelts at certain times. We're going to come through the cabin at certain times. And then there's service. How can I help you? I have to. Sometimes I bring myself back to my 3 S's. Is this a safety thing? If it's a safety thing,
Right.
Get out of my face. I'm going to take care of that. Now, for your listeners and watchers, you don't know this about me. Among my other hats,
Oh, yes.
I have been a CPR instructor for 30 years. I have been an EMT for over 25 now.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
I've been a firefighter.
I heard that.
I've done disaster work with the Red Cross, responding to with their national disaster team to everything from tornadoes to hurricanes.
Wow.
And so I view the world with a safety lens. And if everybody isn't safe, then I'm not doing my
Right.
job, and I've got to get on that.
Yeah.
Once that's done, what can I do in a structured way in my classroom so that people know, go ahead and sharpen your pencil. You need it. I'm not going to say you have to wait till a certain moment.
Right.
You're going to miss something. I don't want you to miss anything. And if it's too loud, I'll pause. What a great way for me to
take a little break.
Take a break and stop and honor the fact that you need your pencil sharpened. Now, if you're going to do it for 5 minutes, we're going to have a talk about how sharp do you need that pencil. But,
right.
And your listeners are also getting a feel for what is my dynamic, right? Maybe it's just that I've been around the block a couple of times by now. It takes more to get me upset than it used to. I can't get worked up about some of the little stuff, and sharpening pencils I regard as little stuff.
Right.
You know, when I first started teaching, you needed to bring your own pencil to class. And if you didn't, then you had to leave your shoe with me or something so that I would get my pencil back.
Right.
Now I'm like, get a pencil. I'll get more. I don't have. And maybe this is also a post-COVID thing, right? We need our students to have the supplies they need.
Yes.
And if we're not able to provide them, then we need to figure out a different way of doing it.
True.
But then the service part is, I am at the front of the classroom to provide for this group of kids for the time that they are in my room.
And I think consistency is very important. We talk about the trauma bond. Trauma bond's caused by intermittent reinforcement. And that intermittent reinforcement gives you like a dopamine hit to where either that or you're hypervigilant. It starts damaging your brain. Also, even just yelling. Mm-hmm. So it hypes people up. And
so yelling is very stressful. I try really hard never to yell. And when I do, the whole room is like, oh my God, she raised her voice. And usually it's because I can't be heard in the room because everybody's just gotten so loud. You know, take 30 teenage boys in the room. Yes. Whoever thought that was a good class list, I don't know.
Now, because of COVID, we had it where it was split. We had Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday we had off for cleaning, and then we had another cohort Thursday, Thursday, okay. Friday, and then we had online. So our class sizes were anywhere from 3 to 12. Did you?
That was a very different paradigm from what I worked in.
Oh.
Because I was at the early college when we first shut down, and the college, it was based out of a college. That meant that we had to follow the college protocols.
Oh, okay.
They shut down everything. I don't know how nursing students learned nursing virtually.
Oh, were they still graduating them? Because I was in nursing school, and you had to do like clinicals. Yeah. It was like 10 credits a semester of just the clinicals.
And so they were doing things very differently. And some of those programs actually still had their clinicals or pushed their clinicals off for a semester and then came up with other things as we got to know better what we needed to do for COVID. But we were literally virtual for that next year and a half. When I taught more recently, we had I think a week or two where we had to be virtual. But I know that where we're at together now, they would have half the kids one day and half the kids the next. So there were a lot of different paradigms. There were teachers that had to go to school and teach.
Okay.
But the kids stayed at home. In my case, I had to stay at home and my kids had to stay at home, which since I was in a place where I had no internet was really fun.
Oh.
And I had to get special permission and call the police department to know when I was on and off campus, when I had to go to campus to teach, because nobody was allowed on campus. I had to have special permission. But I had no internet.
Right.
So I think every school had a different solution.
Right.
And we'll put solution in quotes because I don't know that any of it was a good solution. In fact, I think we should be asking ourselves societally, if another pandemic hits, what do we want this to look like going forward?
Right.
Do we see this as the first reaction we should have in the face of another pandemic?
True.
Because I think we know a lot of harms came out of it. And I don't know that we know all the harms that came out of it. Just
No, we
throwing that
don't.
out there. And I don't know if you realize this, but in the Battle Creek area, during the avian flu outbreak in 1918, they still had school.
Oh,
And of course, in 1918, we didn't have computers. You weren't going to do anything virtually.
right. Now, is that the same time the Spanish flu was going on at what
That
time?
would have been about I think
Yeah.
that was the same strain.
Era,
Different. Yeah. But there's pictures of school kids in Battle Creek, and I want to say it might have even been at what's now the Federal Center. I don't remember. But they had kids in classrooms. There were very few kids because I think they made the classrooms smaller, and they were all bundled in their winter clothes with the windows open.
Oh.
Because with the air circulation,
Oh.
right? Why do we have an increase in cold and flu season in the winter?
Because there's no circulation.
Because we're all indoors and we're all closer together and we don't have that circulation.
My sister just
wearing
joined.
Masks.
Hi,
Hi,
Susie. This is my coworker, Dr. Schaeffer.
Hello.
And we were just, Susie, actually, I want to talk to you, Dr. Coleman. In the like operating rooms or those kind of things, do they have where they have kind of like a little, I don't know, cliff notes or cheat sheets on the procedure that's being done? Because I heard something like that. Is there something like on the monitor that says, I don't know, cut a 2 inch, I don't know, where are we going? 2 millimeter incision, centimeter, I don't know.
Hi, and welcome to the metric system. My students always wonder why they have to learn that. That's a really good example of why.
That's true. That's true. And in medical, though, with the CCs and because you got to do with the milliliters and all that. So, Susie, is it a bad connection? I think it might be a slow connection. But we were talking about that earlier about
whether
how
there's
much
instruction or guidance in the operating room that would give. Because my joke was that if you have to Google where the gallbladder is, I'm going to fire you because, well, I don't want you to not know where things are when you're going into me to fix me up.
Right. And like with artificial intelligence, how we're kind of dumbing ourselves down because we become so reliant on outside forces instead of being self-reliant on our knowledge.
And isn't it funny because when we say self-reliant, most people wouldn't think about intellectually self-reliant.
True.
We would think more in terms of what resources we bring to bear and what problem solving we can do. But we don't even think of the problem solving as a brain exercise. We think of it more as a resource exercise.
And I know I struggled with common sense. Like I'm super smart. I took the teacher test, 100%, 100%, 100%, 100%, 28%, 100. No, but 128 on common sense.
but you have to remember, Mark Twain said, common sense isn't common.
Okay, good.
And then do you want to know the Schaeffer corollary?
Huh.
Speaking of our topic tonight, common courtesy isn't common.
Oh. Exactly. I didn't even think about that.
That's why it's the Schaeffer corollary. You'll have to come up with your own.
Yeah. And manners have gone way down.
Oh, please. What manners?
Shut up. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining. I'll probably
this has been really fun, and I hope we can do this again.
Yeah, we will.
We've been all over the map, so if you want to touch base with Cynthia and say, hey, I want to hear more about whatever.
I do want to talk about in the next one about kind of, I don't even know the right words for it. But you've dealt with some safety stuff with like shootings and safety protocols and all that kind of stuff. So Guys, thanks so much for joining. And Suku, Kamuku, I will see you pretty soon, and everybody else. Thanks so much for joining.
It's been a pleasure.
See you soon.
Hopefully I didn't embarrass you or do anything too crazy.
No, you